Hi, my name's Stephen Dowds. This is the first show of Start the Conversation, a small snippet, interactive conversation about a topic of the day with an interesting person. Today, I'm joined by Kath Bishop. Kath Bishop is an elite athlete, has been an Olympic, decorated Olympian for Team GB, has also worked in the diplomatic service and is the author of a fantastic book called The Long Win, which challenges the language around winning. So welcome, Kath.
Good to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. No, I am. It should be really good. I mean, today we're going to be looking specifically at violent language and where that language exists within our societies, both business and at home and around us, and also in the sporting world, and just kind of challenge some of those concepts and ideas. Kath, we've been talking offline about some of these ideas of recent times, but let's dive into specifically the business world. Your Long Win book obviously took you into the world of business where you've worked yourself as well. You must have had loads of conversations that have violent language permeated through the business. What sort of examples have you seen?
Yeah, so I mean, my whole fascination with this topic of success, how do we see success, is one that's led me to look at the language with which we define success. And then within that, to look at what themes come up. And yes, I often see and hear that the business world is a battle and things are framed in terms of battle plans, strategies, and of course, terms like deadlines, targets, all of these things. But it was actually you who highlighted to me the real meaning of deadline, which is quite shocking.
It really is. That came about only because I was listening to a Radio 4 program. I forget which one it was now, but there was a fantastically interesting woman who was being interviewed, and she gave us a short talk about her mother being murdered when she was very young, and then started looking at how she dealt with that, but where violence lived in her world. And one of the things she mentioned was the origin of this word deadline. And for those that don't know, and it included me until a few weeks ago, the deadline is literally the line that was around a prison over which if you stepped as a prisoner, you could be shot and killed. So it was physically the dead line that you couldn't cross, otherwise that was the end of your life. And that just struck me as like an epiphany moment. I've used the word deadline every day in business and multiple times a day, and never with any malicious intent. It wasn't that I was going to shoot somebody. Nobody was going to cross my line and that was the end of them. But it was incredible that that word would have such incredible violence and be everywhere, used on every tongue.
Yeah, and I mean, even just when you stop and think deadline, it's got dead in it. So, in itself, that's a heavy laden word that's not positive. And then when you see that kind of additional layer of meaning as well, you sort of realize that, if we don't pay attention to language, it can also start to have an impact on the way we think, the way we behave, and the way we interact with each other. And
Yeah.
sometimes we need to step back and think about, is the language we're using helping us to achieve what we want to achieve? Is it actually helping us move forward, helping us explore our potential? Or is in some ways, is it actually kind of making us have a less positive experience of the working world and as such holding us back?
Yeah, that came to my mind actually as we were talking about sort of. I picture myself back at BNY Mellon where I used to work, and I used to run recruitment there. And we had deadlines literally on projects that would go right across the desk. Everyone was struggling with their deadlines, and that also made me realise that no one, certainly in my experience, was ever really positive about a deadline. Yeah, a deadline was always an end of something that was going to finish something, something that led to panic and anxiety and all that sort of stuff. And it just made me think, I wonder if that is coming from the language rather than from the act of a deliverable.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think, just as I was talking about it, I can feel that sort of pit in the stomach that drives in a shot of adrenaline when you've only got 15 minutes left to finish your document, whatever it might be, or your letter or your press communications. And that whole thing is, putting kind of toxic emotions and feelings and literally sending those hormones around that inside us create stress, create toxins, create, and a draining moment, and there are several, if that's happening many times a day, that's just draining our energy, taking it away from actually what we want to put it into. And I think you're right. If we could start to reframe things, then that might lead to a different experience, different quality of performance, different way of thinking. And that's the challenge, isn't it? And yet we just take these things for granted. We're so busy trying to make the deadline, we don't actually think about, is it helping us to live a life that's driven by deadlines?
Yeah, absolutely. Busy being busy rather than busy being effective. I know one of the things I always used to crave when I was working in big business was just that window of opportunity to stop and reflect and think. But yeah, from a language point of view, it was so pervasive. It was everywhere. I mean, in every conversation, whether it be internally amongst my colleagues or whether it be externally with clients and internal clients as well. But yeah, it's interesting what you say there as well, because it was not just affecting me, it was affecting others. If I was feeling those things, I almost couldn't help but project it to others as
Yeah,
well.
you transmit it. Yeah.
That's one of my kind of, looking back on it now, I feel bad about that. Yeah, there were people around me that I gave a bit of a hard time on occasions because they were missing these stressful moments.
Yeah, and I'm aware of that kind of now in this work life, kind of working at home. Again, if I've got sort of some, a kind of deadline coming towards me that's framed like that in my head, and I'm trying to do something else in a different part of my life, in a different part of the house. So it's actually hanging over me, and that mood then comes on to something I'm doing with my kids, or something else that's happening. So yeah, you're right. It expands into other spaces. And what might happen if we actually reframe some of these things? What might that experience be? We're not allowing ourselves to explore what's possible. We're all the time using these limiting words, but not just limiting, also violent, draining, negative, exhausting words that make life a battle.
Yeah.
That's not a good way. It's not a sustainable way of being at our best.
God, it makes me frustrated and anxious just talking about it right now. But also, your experience from the world of sport, I think, must have a lot of those similar crossovers, right? I mean, obviously, as we mentioned, as an elite athlete, as a Team GB Olympian, that doesn't come easy, and you must have gone through a lot of language. Well, I know you have because I've read the book. So, tell us a little bit about some of the language you faced there.
Yeah, it's, again, these battle metaphors come up all of the time, which can be very draining. And I think, there's this sense that, certainly in the macho sporting narrative that's still very dominant, at grassroots level as well as elite level, there's this sense that, beating yourself up is good, completely wiping yourself out, beasting yourself, all of this stuff, that's success, that's really good. But actually, at the same time, our more sophisticated understanding of performance means that we need relaxation and recovery and grace. And, to be in the moment, in the flow, requires us to be very, present, not battling. Battling brings tension. So there is this sort of contrast of that old narrative that's very much about the kind of violent language, the battlefield language, and yet that's not what performance requires. A beautiful tennis stroke, a beautiful rowing stroke, beautiful golf swing. These are things that don't help you if you're trying to beat the ball or beat the water, whatever it is. So we see that language kind of really prevalent, and the concept of actually, is winning about defeating an opponent, smashing them, destroying them, crushing them. All of these words are used when actually isn't success about exploring what's possible, the physical, mental boundaries. And, with our opponent, we can't achieve a peak performance. We need them. They should be, they're the only other people who really understand what it's like to be competing in an Olympic final or whatever it is. Yeah. So, I really wish we would return to that original meaning of competing, competere in the Latin, where it's striving together, not against. And that's a kind of difference. How have we gone from striving together to be at our best to striving against each other to outdo and defeat and vanquish and destroy the other person?
I often hear things like last man standing in the sporting equivalent. You've got to be the only one left on your feet. Everyone else has to be so beaten that they can't even stand. Yeah. And exactly that happened recently. The same day that I heard that wonderful Radio 4 interview, I heard my wife come down from our man cave where she'd been working out, and bless her, she does a workout every day. She's totally obsessed with it. She loves it. And she came down after having done a video by a lady called Caroline Gervan, who I've only just recently found. She's a fitness YouTuber. And her whole series is called Annihilation. No, when she said to me, I've just done this Annihilation workout. I was like, was that the goal? Was that really what you wanted, was to be annihilated here? Is that the thing? Yeah. It just struck me as a really interesting phrase, and it carries so much weight.
I mean, it's powerful. If you stop for a moment, annihilation, that means wiping ourselves out. And that's the goal. That's what we're putting our energy into.
Mm.
And we can feel like, okay, we've got the endorphins going and we're piling the energy in. But actually, in some ways, we're holding ourselves back by this language. Why would having a really good physical and mental workout need to be equated to annihilating ourselves,
Mm.
destruction,
No, I mean, quite
creating
clearly.
ourselves?
No, exactly. I mean, clearly, with all the people that go through this process, I don't think what's on the front of their mind is annihilation. I don't think they want to do anything other than something constructive. They definitely don't want to destroy their fitness. They want to build it and improve it and continue that. I mean, in Helen's case, she wants to be a fitter older lady. That when she gets older, she wants to have the body that will not be an Olympian, but be someone that can just carry her through life and give her as little issues as possible. So yeah, the concept of annihilation just was almost at odds to her actual goal. So I thought that was interesting, that it was normalized to be subconsciously contentious to what she wanted to really achieve.
What do you think is the impact though of, because we we'd say, well, consciously I'm wanting to be fit, so what's wrong with this? And yet I'm calling it annihilation, this sort of contradiction, this tension. What do you think some of the impacts of that are on
I
us?
know for a fact that when I watch her do something really constructive, she gets that endorphin rush, she gets that serotonin hit, she feels high, and she's really proud of what she's achieved. And most women of her age group, she's not old, by the way, in case she's watching this, but of her age group, wouldn't be able to do the things she does. And she's really proud about that. And all credit to her for doing it. But it is interesting when she comes down and says, oh, I've done this workout and this makes me feel this way. If it's a positive thing, she uses positive language. If it's something that was really hurting or caused potential injury where she had to stop because it was a little too far beyond her means, you can hear her using more negative language around that. And I do think that the negative language feeds directly into the negative performance. I think if it was positively stated, it might have a different outcome. I don't know for sure, of course, but I think my gut feel is that positively stated would definitely result in more positive outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a kind of interesting, bigger question for us just to reflect on. How might we then take that language of annihilation and have it come out in a different part of our lives in some way? Again, not consciously, but because we're used to using it, we've subconsciously taken it into our vernacular. And, I really wonder whether we're quicker to get to thinking of a violent option, if you like. Again, maybe not in practice, but in the language that we use, or our attitude to someone else, whether it's in parenting or teaching or dealing with a frustrated customer, or when we're driving on the roads. Do we have that sort of sense that violence is part of how we make sense of the world and how we view situations, and through that lens then are we kind of looking for it, and therefore it's more likely to happen?
Yeah, no, almost like a confirmation bias in some ways. Yeah, no, it's interesting. And then the other side of it, obviously, we've taken a look into business and sport there, but the other side of it is just like you touch on general life. How we use that vocabulary in our own lives. I know for a fact that I'm not the total Instagram generation. I'm 41 now, so they're a few years below me. But you'd often hear phrases about somebody smashing it or killing it. Particularly, that's the one that always stood out in my mind. Is that somebody killing it is doing the best that they can possibly do, or above expectations. But actually, it's the same super violent language that ends in we know that killing something is to end something's life, right? So it's the reverse of what you're actually trying to achieve. Interesting.
Yeah, and it just feels chilling, doesn't it? Why have we come to use that language and think that's a sign of doing something really well? Being on top of things is associated with destroying somebody else. That's sinister, isn't it?
It is. So what do we do about that?
Well, the first thing is to become aware of it. And once we become aware of it, we start to think about, we notice it more. And then when we notice it more, we notice patterns that are coming up. And then we can start to choose some different language. I think it is, first of all, just tuning in. And actually, to tune in, we need to be more present to what other people are saying, the language they're using, the language we're using. Whereas almost if we're on automatic pilot, we just repeat all this stuff about deadlines and, yeah, I'm killing it. You know, we sort of trot it out in a way that isn't very intentional. So there is something about being really present and choosing our words to reflect actually what the impact is we want to have. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I completely agree. I think it's difficult to do because unless it's on the front of your mind, you don't know you're doing it half the time. Like I say, I use the word deadline on a regular basis, not with any malicious intent. So to not know about it meant that I wouldn't change it, right? So I suppose that was kind of the point of this series of conversations, is that if we can raise the concept of where violent language exists and the negative impact that that could have, or at the very least, the limiting impact that that could have on one's performance, on a team performance, a business performance, a school performance, you know, any of those kind of performance opportunities or fora, then I think we do have the opportunity to ask a question. You know, no one's saying you have to change your behavior. Of course you don't. I mean, that's the beauty of being a free human, is you get to decide on what you want to do. But putting it front of mind, I think, gives you the opportunity to then make that choice. And you might choose to do that differently. Although making change is hard. I totally appreciate that change isn't something you just happen lock stock with yourself and then the rest of your culture. I mean, from a change point of view, what sort of barriers do you think might exist to change?
So, yeah, it's that, I'm always slightly torn between, you know, on the one hand, we find change hard. On the other hand, change is natural. We change through our lives. We grow. We change all the time. Our bodies are changing all the time. So there's always that slight contradiction. So we can change if we want to. And these are quite small changes. Just changing the words we use can have quite a big impact. So, you know, I think it's about noticing when people don't use this language, what language do they use? And maybe, you know, maybe I'll try some of that. I mean, I think it can help us to be more present in meetings if we're looking for things like that, thinking about, you know, what's the language being used for this project that we're about to start, or this, you know, challenging customer relationship. How might we frame that differently that would then lead to a different outcome? It gives us some options. Choice is a good thing because it frees things up, whereas a lot of this language is closing stuff down and making it feel very sort of threatening to us. And then if we feel threatened and not safe, you know, that again doesn't help us to think clearly, to think creatively, to think in a resilient way. So I do think we only need quite small change, but it's that being really conscious, switching on, not being on autopilot, in a meeting, not multitasking, so that you're in a meeting, but you're also checking your emails at the same time. You're actually listening to what people say. You're actually thinking about it, reflecting and thinking, what's the language they're using and what language could I use that might actually get me better buy-in to what I'm doing, people on side, people excited about what I'm doing, rather than threatened by whatever deadline I might be giving out to them.
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm laughing because I recognize the multitasking, checking your phone constantly thing for best part of all of my career, I would say. So it's always been something else. You're never really present in that moment, and present in that room, you're always having to think about something else. Well, I say that you don't have to. You can choose to respond more effectively to that scene. And I think the thing around change is interesting as well. You and I are both Seth Godin fans, I happen to know. And I don't know, as I was preparing for this, actually, I got one of Seth Godin's blogs landed in my inbox, which was entirely coincidental. And if you've not read it yet, I'm just going to read an excerpt to it because I think it fits really well with the concept of change. And he looks at change as a cultural change. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about here. It's not just change for yourself. It is that, but if you change yourself then on a micro level, then maybe you can change people on a macro level, and culture can shift around it, and the violent language can regress, and the more positive language can be promoted. But effectively, it says this: it says culture shifts slowly. It's only when the people around you change that you change. That's the smallest viable audience that's so important. Focusing on a specific group of people, understanding their beliefs, engaging with empathy, creating new social norms, and then peer-to-peer spreading that new normal. And I just thought that was exactly what we're talking about here when it comes to change. If you can work on a very small micro level, then if you repeat that enough and it becomes normal, then it will become infectious almost, you know, and it can move on to a more macro and cultural level.
Yeah, you're right. It starts inside our own heads, even because we talk to ourselves all the time.
Mm.
And I think we beat ourselves up, to use another aggressive phrase, in so many ways that actually we could change the voices inside our head, could have quite a big impact on our own experiences. And of course, that will then come out in how we talk to others as well. But even thinking about that self-talk and how we might be more compassionate and support ourselves more, rather
Mm.
than feel actually I ought to be down on myself and somehow kind of set myself these crazy targets. There we go, another shooting reference.
There you go.
And these deadlines and all of these sort of goals that I should be doing, and all of this language that actually doesn't help us to thrive. So yeah, change that language even inside our heads is the first small change that ripples out.
Well, and I think we all know that small changes is the only way to start, right? Large changes often fail. Small changes are very doable and can be incrementally helpful. So I suppose to conclude the conversation, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking about violent language and what that really means. But I think to conclude, ultimately, I think what we're saying is violent language is there. It's pervasive. Stop and notice it. And then ask yourself a question. Do I want to use that phrase? Is that phrase going to be helpful to me and to others? And if the answer is no, then maybe find a new phrase that's more constructive.
Perfect advice.
Fabulous. Thank you, Kath. Really appreciate your time, and we'll speak soon.
Great to chat.
Take care. Bye.